Hey there and welcome to That News You Care About, a weekly video game news show from the folks over at That Nerdy Site. Today is Tuesday, June 21st of 2022, and I'm one of your hosts, Logan Wilkinson. Joining me, as always, is my Phoenix son, Trevor Starkey.
Hello.
How you doing, Trev?
Doing all right. My company honored or celebrated, observed, I guess, Juneteenth. So I had like a nice little 3-day weekend. And basically this is the last day of my 3-day weekend because of my weird, I work through Saturdays adjusted schedule.
Yeah.
So like Mondays are already my normal day off. So they were like, yeah, go ahead and take Tuesday off. And I was like, all right. So I had a nice little 3-day weekend to just kind of relax and get some stuff done.
Nice. I love that for you. We've more Miss Marvel's coming out. It's exciting. I'm going to watch Miss Marvel. It's great. And then this is the week where the last episode of Obi-Wan is going to go live as well. It's a great time for Logan-centric Disney Plus content. We love it. It's great. But we're not talking about Disney Plus content, but we are talking about things we each love in our own ways. Trevor, we're starting with you here. Square had a little YouTube video celebration stream for the 25th anniversary of Final Fantasy VII, which is absurd to say that it's been 25 years. What were the highs and, if any, lows of the stream there for you?
Yeah, we talked last week about kind of the big announcements that came out of like Summer Game Fest showcase, as well as the Xbox Bethesda. And then like this piddly little like, hey, we're going to celebrate the 25th anniversary of Final Fantasy VII came along and blew all of them out of the water for me. Because they did a 1-2 punch of kind of their big announcements that they closed with, which were a Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII remake called Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII Reunion that they showed off and is coming out this winter. So, within the next like 7 to 9 months ish, I'll be playing that again, and that's going to be a lot of fun. And then they closed out the showcase with the confirmation and title and even a little tease of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, which is going to be part 2 of what they have now confirmed is going to be the like Final Fantasy VII Remake trilogy of games. It's kind of like they announced years ago that like it's going to be a multi-part thing, and it's like, okay, but how many parts are you going to take this one game and kind of turn it into?
Right? Yeah.
And so the fact that they've come out and said like it's going to be it's going to be a 3-game kind of story. This is part 2, and they showed off a little bit of that. It was very cool. Based on like what they've shown, I've got like a couple ideas of like what we were seeing, but I have no idea how it's going to fit within the context of like the broader new game. So yeah, it was like, and that is coming out next winter. So the fact that that's going to be here, a year and change from now, is also very exciting. I presume it will probably get delayed or something like that, as many games are these days. Right. But the fact that it's still like they felt comfortable enough putting like that kind of timetable on it is really cool, especially when you like also factor in that Final Fantasy 16 is supposed to come out sometime in between those games, sometime next year, as well. So it's going to be a busy like 12 months there for Final Fantasy fans, and I am looking forward to it. Also, they like confirmed and then released the next day the Steam version of Final Fantasy VII Remake, which coincided with me getting my Steam Deck not too long ago, so I picked that game up for a second time and have just been enjoying it in bed before I go to sleep, and that's just a fun way to play Final Fantasy VII Remake and revisit that game. So yeah, it was a very good, very exciting kind of few announcements there.
My first question to you is, obviously, as the massive Final Fantasy fan you are, what are your theories right now in terms of what will be covered by part 2 and then what will kind of be left for part 3 of Final Fantasy VII?
So yeah, it's going to be very interesting. I guess like before I throw anything out there,
spoilers for Final Fantasy VII.
I will say,
25-year-old video game. Right?
Spoilers for Final Fantasy VII and Final Fantasy VII Remake, because the interesting element of Final Fantasy VII Remake, which I gave a 10 on our site back when we did like written reviews and stuff, uh, is fascinating because it actually is a a sequel that was snuck in to Final Fantasy
Hmm.
VII. It is a retelling of the game, and Sephiroth kind of like somehow going back in time and literally trying to remake the story of Final Fantasy VII to suit his own needs. So a lot of the first game is, you know, very reminiscent to the opening hours of the original Final Fantasy VII, but then that game ends with you basically like breaking the ties of fate, so anything is completely in the open. We get like hints of like alternate timelines kind of like melding into this world with another character from the series, Zack, who's basically like your main character in Crisis Core. Like historically he dies right before the events of the original Final Fantasy VII, as he's like bringing Cloud to Midgar. And the way Final Fantasy VII Remake ended and then kind of continued on with the Yuffie Intergrade kind of expansion DLC is Zack is alive and well in this continuum, and he's, you know, he's arrived and is looking for Aerith, and so there's like a lot of weird, like, I don't know what to expect. I
Hmm.
imagine that there will be a lot. I imagine it will like start to follow the same path of the original game,
Hmm.
in terms of like the next kind of handful of locations you get to, but then I imagine like Sephiroth is just going to continue to kind of diverge, and so maybe we won't go all of the different places. Like the next couple locations in the original Final Fantasy VII would be Calm, which is kind of the first town you go to, and it's also where you get like a big old backstory like info dump,
Hmm.
which is one of the things that is hinted at in the footage they showed. Basically, you get kind of like Cloud telling this flashback story of 5 years ago when he and Sephiroth went to Cloud's childhood town. And in the trailer they showed, you see Cloud walking around in the kind of large open world environment with Sephiroth kind of in tow, so seemingly kind of planting the seeds that will look at that, and he'll kind of explain to the party, here's what I know about Sephiroth.
Right.
Um, and so yeah, I imagine we'll get, you know, a good chunk of kind of that backstory, kind of filling in how other characters know Sephiroth, and how, you know, like Cloud's history and backstory. And then the real big question for me is going to be like whether Cloud and Zack kind of have any kind of like crossover or interaction, and what that ends up looking like, because that is a big kind of factor to the original Final Fantasy VII storyline. Is Cloud's memories are kind of like this weird infusion of Zack's memories for a lot of bits. Like Cloud was
Hmm.
there, but he was like a grunt. He wasn't the Cloud Strife that like you've been playing throughout the game kind of thing. And it's a big like twist late in the game, that this version of the series already kind of seems to be playing with a little bit. So
Hmm.
yeah, it's like I imagine part two will kind of do a lot of what the first game did, of like, here's the story, you know, but continue kind of
Right.
playing with twists and maybe start doing like an even further branching. And then part three is probably going to be where just everything kind of goes, you know, balls to the wall. Like
Off
if
the
I
rails.
had to guess, I would imagine part two story wise will potentially end at the pivotal moment in the original story where Sephiroth kills Aerith,
This is what I was going to
but
ask
I
next.
imagine
Yeah.
that's not going to happen this time, and something different is going to happen, and whatever that ends up being will kind of set the stage for part three and the kind of the conclusion of the story. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting one, and I'm just very curious to see, you know, where they go with it, and how big and how many kind of like of the iconic locations we actually hit. Some of them I don't envision are going to be kind of included. Like one I will point to is like Fort Condor is like a side mission kind of location in the original game that they turned into a basically a side mission board game that you can kind of play in the DLC. So I imagine they're not going to bother having you go to that location, go see all these things there. But I imagine we'll still get places like Junin, Calm, and then maybe like the Gold Saucer or something like that. And Nibelheim's the big kind of one for story reasons.
Mm-hmm. Interesting, great experience. Do you think they will replace one big character death with another, right? Like, would they possibly substitute her death for another character's death kind of thing? And maybe that's where, they really begin to show like how much it's deviating from the original game kind of thing.
I mean, I've seen that kind of theory going around, and I think that I like, especially if they do, like, they're like, oh, instead of killing Aerith, he kills Tifa this time or something like that. I've seen like a lot of people make that suggestion. I think from a storytelling perspective, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility, but I think that's also a very weak choice, and also a very like problematic choice in 2022 of like, well, we just swapped out killing one female character for another female character.
Right.
But with the overall intent still being to drive like your male hero kind of forward. I don't think that's the most interesting choice they can go with. I think her not dying at all is a bold enough departure from the original story that you don't need to have that replaced. And then it becomes, okay, because in the original story, her death does kind of play a role in, it sets up this kind of magical force that's there to kind of destroy or fight against the like planet destroying meteor at the end of the game. And so I think if she doesn't die and hasn't like inadvertently cast that spell or whatever, then it becomes a different case of, okay, Sephiroth is even more powerful, and we need to get all of our team together to take him out somehow without that kind of Deus Ex Machina element from the first game. So I think the big departure will be that she doesn't die, but I don't think it will necessarily be at the cost of another character. Or if it is, it would be, I think the real like bold move there would be like Cloud dies instead. And it becomes, okay, now the team, your party members without Cloud have to figure out. But I don't think like, I think there would be significant backlash to that decision.
Yeah, I would.
So, and somehow against all odds, like the first game, like won over everybody. So I think doing like that extreme of a departure would be a wild thing.
You're walking into a Last Jedi situation.
Yeah, I'll also point out that I believe it was confirmed that Tetsuya Nomura, who was like the kind of the creative lead behind this, is working on other projects. So he's not actually like as hands-on with this part 2, but he's going to come back for part 3. So yeah, like he's working on Kingdom Hearts 4 right now. So like it's very likely that all of the weirdness of kind of his energy is going to just go into Kingdom Hearts 4, and this is going to be a largely
much
by
more
the numbers
straightforward,
kind of version of a Final Fantasy VII story, and then he'll just kind of come back for the final chapter and make it go buck wild there. So
I wonder, do you think that the person, that if someone different does die, that couldn't be where they bring to a close Zack's storyline, right? Like have him sacrifice himself there almost, instead of like when he was supposed to have died earlier in kind of this new timeline that they're building.
Yeah, I mean, certainly could, and again, for like a story element, the reason Aerith dies in the original is she's like the last of this the ancients, quite literally, the last of this like race of people that had this like inherent connection to magic and the world, and the relationship between those two and the balance between those two. So her death kind of feeds into the larger like life and death, life leading to rebirth kind of story that none of the other characters would fit in as thematically well as that. So like even if it was, Zack dies in that moment, it could be very fitting in terms of like Zack's relationships with other characters, because in Crisis Core that that is coming out, he is canonically like Aerith's kind of first love that
Right.
Aerith is pining over a little bit in the later Final Fantasy VII game. And so like, yeah, he could kind of take the sword in her place or something like that, and kind of still get a hero's ending that he typically and traditionally gets in Crisis Core.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it'd be an interesting choice. But I still like, it would be I would question why go through the effort of bringing him back just to have him die a little bit later in the story.
Right.
But it's certainly something they could play with.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd be curious. And then yeah, I certainly I agree that the part 3 of the trilogy will be the most balls to the wall, because it presumably will be the one where it is Matrix 3, where just like everything's all kind of hit a nexus point now, everything's just kind of going crazy, and they sort of all the threads have been laying are kind of built into the kind of a head there, but that obviously will be many years away, most likely.
I mean, I at the rate they're going, and the fact that like this one is already coming along so well, like I think a lot of the heavy lifting has been done within this engine, and so like I would very much see kind of the part 3, whatever it's going to be, seemingly something, given that they've done Remake, then Rebirth, and Crisis Core is going to be Reunion. I think whatever this ends up being could potentially be like the swan song for the PS5 generation. Like it'll be the end of the generation in 5 years time, maybe something like that.
Right.
And potentially like they do here's the full collection on the PlayStation 6, that you can kind of play all in one.
Yeah, I'll be curious to kind of see what they do from there. Trevor, any other? Oh no, you can go.
Well, I was just gonna say, I'm like, there are definitely elements about the game that I'm gonna be very curious about in terms of like progression across, from like, are you going to somehow carry over all of the stuff that you had at the end of the Final Fantasy VII Remake into the new game, all your items and however much you leveled up the characters, your materia, all that stuff, or are they going to basically like somehow Metroidvania it and basically like, oh, you've lost everything and we're starting anew. I hope they don't do that. I hope they figure out some way to kind of carry everything forward, but I also don't know necessarily what kind of logistical thing that will be, especially since they haven't been highlighting up to this point, hey, keep your save, in the same way that they did, with like the Mass Effect series or something like that. That one had been like announced from launch. Hey, your choices in this first game are going to matter carrying forward. So there are elements like that I'm curious about. But then like just on the flip side of that, Final Fantasy VII Remake did such a great job of like incorporating this active battle system, alongside like just such great boss design, carrying over and very much honoring like the designs and the bosses of the original series, and I just look forward to seeing how that continues, and like some of the cool new boss fights that we'll get kind of in the next chunk of the story, as well as if we end up getting at this point the last the 3 characters that we haven't gotten yet, are going to be Cid, Kate Sith, Ketshi, I don't know how the actual way to say it. I always said it Kate Sith, and then Vincent Valentine, and I'll be curious if we get any or all of those characters moving on into the next chunk of the game, and if we do, especially with Vincent Valentine, I imagine they're going to also fold in a whole bunch of weird Dirge of Cerberus stuff, because that's the other game in the annals of the Final Fantasy VII project, that admittedly I have not played a ton, because it was a first-person shooter on the PS2, which not necessarily a great era for first-person shooters. But yeah, like I'm very curious how they continue to fold in other elements of the mythos of the story, and how they find the ways to tweak it and break it that they did so masterfully in the first game.
Yeah. Any other big announcements from the conference you want to kind of give a shout out to?
The last one I just want to give a little tip of the hat to. Like one, I'm also just very excited for Crisis Core Reunion. Looks like it's going to be a solid remake. Looks very pretty. It looks to me like it may be also in the Final Fantasy VII remake engine. Slightly different kind of combat style and stuff to fit in with what that game originally was, but like looks like everything I would want from a remake of that game. And the fact that that's coming to everything, including like Xbox and Switch, is fascinating when like the remake trilogy is seemingly being locked in behind PlayStation or PC at the moment. So I'll be curious to see where that continues to go. And then lastly, I'm also very curious about what the Final Fantasy Ever Crisis game is going to end up being. This is the mobile game that's coming to iOS and Android. That is basically like another remake of the Final Fantasy VII story, but it's like all of the storylines and games kind of put into one mobile product with like a chibi art style and like much more in fitting with the original like turn-based kind of gameplay and like the static environments that you're kind of like running through versus like the completely built from the ground up kind of Midgar that we had in Final Fantasy VII Remake. So like I'm just very curious what that product is going to end up being. They showed off elements like characters in fights that you wouldn't normally otherwise have seen them in, as well as seemingly where they're going to have a lot of in-app purchases being around character designs, because they show Tifa fighting in like a sweatshirt and they show Aerith fighting in like a wedding dress kind of thing. It's like, okay, I guess you're just going to be able to buy alternate costumes and stuff for these characters. And it got announced as a closed beta for 2022. So I don't know what form that thing is going to take, but I'm curious about that one, just as a like, what is this thing going to do when all is said and done? and who is it being made for? As I often think with like any iOS / Android game, like who is this for really?
Right.
But yeah.
Very, very good. That's all Final Fantasy VII news here. Everyone be excited. Some big exciting things there, Trevor. I also have big exciting things that I love called Tony Hawk Pro Skater, except for my news is decidedly sadder about this thing I love. It seems to be official, or they're pulling from Kotaku or Polygon story. I'm looking at Kotaku that Tony Hawk says a Pro Skater 3 and 4 remake was killed by Activision's moves by Luke Plunkett. We on that nerdy site have talked a lot about Tony Hawk Pro Skater. Some might say too much about a series that has had exactly one game be released in the time that we have been a website. But nonetheless, it is a site filled with Tony Hawk Pro Skater fans. I am among them. And in particular, I think that most Tony Hawk fans would say that Tony Hawk Pro Skater 3 is the best game. There are some people who say 2, but I would say myself and most would say it's 3, which I even went ahead and looked and is currently tied with Grand Theft Auto 3 as the highest rated PS2 game on Metacritic ever, with a 97 out of 100. So it's a very popular game. It's a very good game. And I deeply love Tony Hawk Pro Skater 3. It's one of my favorite games of all time. It's the most important games I've ever played. And when we got that taste of the 1 and 2 remake, I was so excited to then be able to play through 3 and 4 a few years later. That seems to not be the case, which is a real bummer. I think, we've talked also a lot about Vicarious Visions on this podcast, go figure, and kind of Activision's mishandling of kind of everything around this series since the release of the 1 and 2 remake. And I think kind of finally getting that final nail in the coffin from Tony Hawk himself, kind of saying it just doesn't think it's going to happen now. Really sucks, honestly, in the simplest way possible, right? I think Tony Hawk is a series that, I think was so important to so many people's lives first getting into games and first kind of being excited about games at like the end of the 90s through like 2005 or 6, because even going into like underground and that kind of stuff. And then I just feel like it became a series that increasingly was just kind of mishandled and mismanaged. Obviously, famously with the last number, Tony Hawk being just an absolute disaster. And so I think the 1 and 2 remake was such a great step in terms of rehabilitating that series and kind of making fans feel like they can trust a Tony Hawk game again and making them kind of remember why they enjoyed the series so much. And I think 3 and 4 and being able to get those games that so many people love so much would have kind of really helped further that along so more. And now it's at a point of like, I don't even know what the state of that series is. I don't know if there really is a future at this point in time. And it's just such a kind of disappointing reality to kind of look at this really, I think, storied franchise and just be like, what are we even doing with this? It's just another thing that Activision owns to just kind of muddle around with.
Yeah, I mean, I think the writing on the wall on this like has been known since Vicarious Visions got absorbed into the rest of Activision Blizzard to work on the Diablo 2 remake. Last year, 2 years ago, whenever that was. I mean, the first thing. My introduction to this news was Frank, probably our biggest Tony Hawk fan, when he tweeted at it, saying like we suspected as much, but this is the fact that Tony Hawk went on this kind of designer's Twitch stream and kind of confirmed it, is certainly a bummer. Like at the same point, I can't imagine that those games in the grand scheme of where Activision Blizzard makes its money, we're making Activision Blizzard a ton of money. So, and in fact, like the fact that so much attention was paid to like, let's try and like make these as faithful in terms of music licensing as we can to the original. I imagine like these probably end up being on the more expensive side of their games output. So I think they ultimately leaned into, hey, let's just take those talented designers and bring them into these other projects that aren't going to cost us as much on that, and will be like more return on the investment, as we see with games like Diablo 4 coming out and Overwatch 2, right around the corner, both of those right around the corner. But yeah, it's like it was when they, Vicarious Visions and Toys for Bob kind of like doing the like Crash remaster and then the Tony Hawk remaster and like, hey, they're nailing these things. It was very much like, oh, Activision Blizzard is like making games for like fans of those series and also bringing in new audiences.
Doing them very well.
As somebody who hadn't played Crash and hadn't played Tony Hawk, I bought both of those remasters because like the word of mouth around them was so good and so positive. Neither of them ended up clicking with me, but like I definitely had an appreciation that, hey, those are the best versions of those games for the people that love them. Excellent, great. But
I still play Tony Hawk Pro Skater 1 and 2. I still play that remake probably at least once a month, just like pop in and just enjoy that world. And that's the thing. Like I went ahead and checked too. Like you're not even necessarily wrong in terms of like, getting the music license is expensive, obviously, but it's also a thing of like, Pro Skater 1 and 2 was the fastest selling game in the franchise. It sold 1 million copies in its first 2 weeks, right? Like, it did what you would presumably want it to do for a remake of when it came out, like a 22, 23, 24-year-old video games, right? Like, those are totally respectable numbers, I think, for this, right? Like, to me, it goes back to, like, just setting expectations that are, realistic. And like, there probably was, I'm sure, like a boardroom full of accountants who said, this game did great for what it could be. But also if we spent that same amount of money, we could get X amount of sales, more amount of sales out of Diablo or Call of Duty or World of Warcraft, whatever it might be, or get those games finished X amount like quicker kind of thing. But like it's such a shame because they're so talented at at remaking these games and reintroducing to modern audiences and bringing in more people to presumably make like a Crash 4 game, right? Or to make, a new Tony Hawk game down the line as well. Like I think it's reintroducing these franchises to then make more money off in the long run.
Yeah, or like with Overwatch and Diablo, like we can put teams on those games because those games aren't just games; those are stores to buy more stuff within those games. Whereas like they didn't do that with the Tony Hawk. And seemingly they could have. They could have very much made like, hey, yeah, you could unlock all this stuff, all these like extra accessories and stuff by, doing all the challenges and all this stuff, or you could pay for it. They could have done that. I don't know. Like I'm honestly shocked they didn't. I guess they probably would have gotten significantly more backlash if they had done that. But yeah, it like Activision Blizzard isn't interested in making, some money on those games being like the fastest selling iterations of their franchises. They're interested in making all of the money they can off of relatively minimal extra work. Like they've done the game and now we're going to design new costumes and throw those out, and people are going to pay an arm and a leg for all that extra new stuff, and then 7 years from now we'll have a sequel for Overwatch 3 and Diablo 5 and do it all over again, and Tony Hawk just doesn't fit in that mindset, or and Call of Duty being obviously the other big masthead there for Activision Blizzard. I will say there is like maybe a glimmer of hope in that. Obviously, Xbox is buying Activision Blizzard, and Phil Spencer been making a lot of gamer friendly decision making and stuff, and Xbox first party games constantly actually looking for Xbox like looking to actually release games. So I wouldn't be I would not put it outside of the realm of possibility for once that merger kind of goes down for Phil to basically be like, hey, we're going to actually go ahead and take Vicarious Visions and put them back on the things they were doing really, really great. And let's go ahead and have them make a Tony Hawk Pro Skater 3 and 4 as the follow-up to. And you can play it first on Game Pass, or you can play it exclusively on Game Pass, or whatever it ends up being. Like, I think there's still potential for the future down the line. It will just be a matter of, is the talent still going to be there by the time all of that has happened to, handle a restructure like that, or have a lot of those Vicarious Vision people started going off and finding other jobs because Activision Blizzard has been a shit place to work for many, many years, and they didn't want to deal with that anymore.
Yeah, I'm just bummed. It's just a bummer. It's just a bummer story, and I just want to play Tony Hawk Pro Skater 3 in any sort of modern, not 4 generation ago since.
Is that the kind of thing that would get you to buy an Xbox, or a device that can stream xCloud or something like that?
It's so funny you keep saying that. There are just like these because really the question, the moment in the sand will be with Hellblade 2, right? And it is funny though because there are this ever increasing drip of games, and I just want to play this game. It's like, man, Xbox, and god damn it, and it is getting to the point where it would not be a completely unreasonable purchase by a certain point in time, right? Because the Xbox is it'll be 2 years old this fall, if I'm doing the math in my head right. Time's a flat circle in the pandemic, but I think that sounds right.
Yeah, they all came out.
And so, it is not beyond the realm of possibility that I would get my first Xbox ever this generation, just because they're increasing these games. I'm just I just want to play this game really bad. And obviously the line in the sand for that will come with Hellblade 2, where I just might have to bite the bullet just to play that one game. But yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see whether or not I get an Xbox, or maybe the question can be better for him to just win, if not if. Trevor.
Well, that's again, I would also say like Xbox continuing to really push that. Hey, you don't actually need to buy a device if you want to play xCloud and you have like good enough internet. You can maybe play on your Samsung TV or whatever. Like they're coming out with like other devices, like in the same way that you can just get like an Amazon Fire Stick or whatever.
Right.
They'll give you an xCloud stick that you plug in, and boom, you've got access to, you know, anything on Game Pass that you want to stream if you want. Like so if you don't want to spend the full amount for a console, they seem to be completely fine being like, okay, then, you know, play it on PC or play it on blah, 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 or whatever. And just all you need to do is maybe buy an Xbox controller and you'll be set. Who knows?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what I do on that. Trev, that's it though. Do you have any shout outs?
I do not. No, I don't think so.
Okay. I've got a shout out, and it's one I think you'll enjoy as well, actually. It is from Guy Dolbey over on Polygon, and it is called Stephen Moffat's TV Wasn't Made for These Times. And yeah, I think it is, I'm dropping it in Discord right now for you, but I think it's one you really enjoy. It goes into Stephen Moffat's kind of writing career and his time obviously doing both Doctor Who and also Sherlock. And it's interesting, as someone who it's amazing we've done a Doctor Who podcast, by the way. But as someone who is a big Doctor Who fan, like I know you are as well, and pointed out some things that I both really like about Stephen Moffat, and also certain things that have always made me not love him as opposed to some other Doctor Who writers or showrunners. In particular, I think him as a showrunner is maybe not the show's strongest suit, but it's really, really interesting, I thought, and it's a really cool kind of look at like just how different media was in general a decade ago, even though it didn't sound like that long ago. Like it was just before so many huge kind of paradigm shifts would all happen within the industry, including obviously the Avengers came out in 2012, and how that would shift everything. Streaming wasn't a thing yet. Walking Dead was only in its second season. Game of Thrones like still starting, like just how much like our modern pop culture kind of consciousness has been like transformed into in a decade. So I thought it was a really fun read. I encourage everyone to go check it out as well, particularly you, Trevor, because I think you really like it. Otherwise, that's the show. Thank you for watching or listening on not a YouTube exclusive series. Had to break that into my repertoire now again. If you like what you heard, you can go over to the podcast service of your choice, like and subscribe, rate and review us on iTunes, give us those 5 stars, and leave a comment telling us what you like. You can also go over to youtube.com/thatnerdysite, like to the video, subscribe to the channel, ring the little bell to get notified when a new vid goes live Monday through Saturday, at least temporarily, as well as going over to thatnerdysite.com and checking out all the latest reviews, features, and podcasts that go live there. You can go find Trevor at Trevor J. Starkey on the internet. Trevor, anything that you want to plug or shout out?
I will give a couple little plugs. One, as I think you alluded to earlier, maybe that was before we started recording, I don't know. This week's episode of That D Plus Show will be kind of our Obi-Wan Kenobi season wrap up. So definitely check that out. And then in honor of that, one of our Let's Plays this week was Star Wars Jedi Starfighter that I went and played because it is available on PlayStation Plus Premium.
I wonder if they have Star Wars.
Which one are you looking for?
I wonder if they have Star Wars Bounty Hunter on there.
I think so, maybe. Yeah, I think it was in there.
I'm checking right now.
The other one, the other Let's Play that will be going live Thursday. I finally, after 20 episodes of Cameron playing Friday Night Dying Light, I finally bit the bullet and picked up Dying Light 2.
Did you really?
This last weekend. So I played the first hour of it for a Let's Play, and basically like jokingly said like I'm gonna beat this game before Logan and Cameron do, and spoilers, in the time since I have run credits on that game. So yes, I beat.
Have you really?
I beat that game before both of you did.
I'm amazed that you finished Dying Light 2.
Yep.
Good for you.
It was like playing it on easy mode. We'll talk about this, if we eventually cover it on a That Nerdy Site show. But yeah, like playing it on easy mode, and it being like an action enough game, definitely eliminated a lot of the like horror jump scare elements that I was mostly concerned about. I will say, having beaten the game, and I will say like playing it on easy, like I probably did more playing at night just because that's when you get like you go in and like get the more resources and stuff like that. So like I probably played more in that, but then like jumping into a new game plus like ramps up the difficulty and like just makes the game not fun. So like that sucked. and also it replaced my save, so I can't just like go back to like the end game of of my original game. So that's incredibly frustrating, and some just terrible like save design. Like it should have been, okay, you're jumping into a new game plus, we're going to like put that into a new save slot for you. And the fact that they didn't do that is incredibly frustrating, because now just enemies, even on like easy in New Game Plus, are jumping out and like one hit killing me, and I'm like, fuck this just isn't fun.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, I I recorded a Let's Play of Dying Light 2 and beat the game, in like admittedly I had like again a long weekend myself.
3-day weekend, right?
But like 30 some odd hours, just kind of like race through it. I definitely like when I got to the point that Cameron is at in his Let's Plays, I was like, okay, like this definitely took me way shorter than I was anticipating, and Cameron is not anywhere near like being done with that series apparently. So,
I told you that he's gonna take the whole year to finish this game.
Yeah. So yeah, check that out, and I look forward to. I have not told Cam that I picked it up and have played it, so I look forward to that being a surprise when he sees that tweet go out on Thursday. And then me awesome. Jokingly tweeting about how I beat him to the punch.
Yeah, that's great. I really love that. So there you go. Check that out as well. And finally, you can go check out That Nerdy Site at That Nerdy Site all across the internet, where you can check out that great tweet. For myself, for Trevor, for all of us here at That Nerdy Site, play your games and be good to each other.